Hello Tanglers, this is going to be my first attempt at making a video. So this was the second tile that we did today, and I am going to now show you the steps that we took. So the first thing that we're going to do is our 4 dots, but we want to do them a little further in than we typically do, because what we're going to do is make a frame, just like you would frame a piece of your art. And then we are going to connect our dots, and we are leaving ourselves with a nice wide frame. Okay, so we've got steps 1 and 2, dots and border. Now we're going to start our string. So the first thing we're going to do is separate vertically in half, and then we're going to go horizontally in half, but we could also turn the tile. Remembering that you always want your hand to be comfortable. Now that is not a straight line, but it's okay, right? We always say it's okay. So now let's put a dot in the middle-ish of each. And then what we're going to do is I want you to come down this middle line about half. So see how it's all roughly in line. We're doing the same thing here. Same thing here. This is going to match up. And same thing here, roughly. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is with the dots that are on the lines, we are going to connect those, which gives us a diamond. Then we're going to connect the outer dots going through the diamond dot. And that's going to give us a square outside the diamond. Okay? So we have our diamond, our square, and then our bigger square because of our frame. All right, now we are ready to switch from our pencil to our pen. So the first thing that we're going to do, and realize, like as I look at this and see how angled this is, I don't know if you can tell as much, because this was pencil. When we go with our pen, I could straighten this up, and I probably will. So the first thing we're going to do, though, is let's go over the diamond. Remembering that turning your tile is always going to make it the most comfortable for your hand. And then in that diamond, well, we're going to outline. We're not outlining, excuse me, we're tracing over the pencil lines, and I liked those, so I didn't feel the need to finesse them at all. Then we're going to encase each of those segments just on the inside with a rice pod. So this might remind you of bales, the grid tangled bales. Okay, now in between each of these, we are going to do a flux that does not reach the top. You want to leave a little space, and I am going to choose not to add an embellishment. All right, now I'm going to go to this outer square, and I'm going to ink these lines, but this is where I think I'm going to tweak it a little bit because I can. So that pencil line I'm now going to ignore, but it just makes me a little bit happier to have it straighter. If it were ink and not straight, I would leave it alone. I would not be worried about it. I would just accept it. I might have just made that worse. That's okay. I would just accept it. Once it's ink, You just accept it. I can't tell yet. I don't think it's worse. I think I'm just still distracted by the pencil, but it's okay no matter what. Okay, now at this point, I like to play with these triangles. So what we're going to do is we're going to make just half of a rice pod, but it's going to be very shallow. And then we're going to move a little bit and do an aura, aura, aura. And you're just going to aura as far as you can. We're going to skip that initial space, leaving that plain. And then we're going to ink part way, leaving the middle open so that it gives a highlight. We skip this one, go to the next, skip that one. This I can only get a little tiny bit of ink in, and that's okay. We're going to do the same on all 4, so I've got 3 more to do. So I am going to speed up a little bit. Just know that Zentangle is never a race, and if I'm going a little too fast for you, because this is a video, you can always pause it. Okay, so that's 2 of them. Rotate my tile, keep going. Remember that typically in Zentangle, whatever you do to one, you must do to all. So because I want for my triangles surrounding the diamond to be the same, I have to repeat what I did in the first triangle. Now it does appear that these stripes I made considerably thinner. So it's not ending the same way. Up here I ended on dark, here I'm ending on a white, but that's okay. That part's not going to be noticeable to me. You know, you really have to think and focus to get the same number of stripes. A little harder for me to do because I'm talking while I'm drawing. So I just figure wherever it lands, it'll be okay. Because really, now that it's finished, I'm not really counting my stripes. I can tell, but I'm good with that. All right, so now at this point, we're going to take the sides of this inner square and we're going to extend it. We're going to continue that line. So this one, I'm going to continue to the right and to the left. And then I'm going to turn. Continue the side to the right, continue the side to the left. I am not currently inking over these pencil lines that exist, but if I did, it would be okay. And the last one, extend the side to the right and to the left. Now, I could have done this at any point. It could have been the first thing that I did. I usually tell you to wait to ink your border because you don't know if you might decide to break that border. But in this case, I know for a fact that I am not going to break the border. So I really could ink that in. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize it dropped. I really can ink that in at any time. Okay, so now I have these fully inked 4 corners. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a rice pod and a rice pod only on those inner lines. I'm not doing rice pods on the outside border. So I'm going to do that for every corner. So I put a rice pod on the inner sides of my corner squares, leaving those plain, just for now. And my last one. Okay, now I'm going to do half rice pods, quite similar to what I did here in the middle. And I'm going to go around the square. Notice that these are halves. I do consider this pencil line, even though I haven't inked it yet. So I don't want to do one big one. I want two small ones. And what I notice immediately by putting these half rice pods is that while a moment ago this was very geometric, it was very linear with that square, now just because I put those half rice pods, it's made it softer. It has softened the edges. So the next step that we want is, it is the hardest, I think. Certainly it is for me. I need to go, I want to create, if we look back at the example, I want to create these circular images in the corners. So the way that I do that is I'm going to go from a corner of the rice pod to a corner of the rice pod here. I like to do it in air a couple times first so that I could see, oh, there I didn't hit it. That might be too big. I'm going to trace along the lines too much. So I really practice a couple times in air before I hold my breath and I get brave and I draw the curve. And then I turn, same thing. Imagine where you're drawing. And then we kind of just go for it. And one last time, imagining where it's going to be. And then being brave. And that way I have 3/4 of a circle. So of course we have to do that for all of them. So because my squares, I didn't use a ruler because we don't do that. Because my squares were not all squares, my circles will not all be circles. Some of them will be way more oblong because we are not perfect. And you know what? I've come to decide that that's really nice. It's nice not to all be perfect. And I've allowed myself to feel that in my art. Okay. So now I've got my circles. Wow, I thought that was going to be much harder than it was. Not that it was easy, but I did it. So just like in between two rice pods in the middle, we put an unembellished flux that didn't touch the border of that segment. I'm going to do the same thing here. Notice it starts in the corner and I don't touch the top. Oop, but I do it even between a full flux, a full rice pod, and a half rice pod. So in each circle, I'm winding up with 3 of those. Notice how I'm constantly moving my tile. My right hand, my drawing hand, hasn't moved. This is the most natural way for me to draw the flux. Oh, I'm sorry, I just realized that was out of the camera angle. I hope it wasn't like that for too long. Okay, so now we've got all of those finished. So at this point, I actually, if you did ink that line, then this is what this next step will look like for you. I want to make a real flux. So I trace up most of it and then I curve off, touching back, and I'm gonna add the vein and some dots. And then I'm gonna put a smaller one in the top. Again, same idea. First one I made a little larger than I wanted, so that's okay. And then I'm going to ink in those spaces, those triangular spaces at the top. And right here in the middle, you can see why it really didn't matter if you had inked those pencil lines that were in the middle, because we just inked right over them. So there, we've inked it up, and that is the one side. So we do the same thing, because what we do to one, we do to all. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. And I'm actually gonna do all of my flux at one time, and then I'll go back and do all my inking. And I've got one more. Oop, that one's a little baby one. And then I'll go in and I will ink. And always try to remember that the time that you take to ink, your piece will thank you. If I ink faster and I leave something like this, see the difference? If I don't leave any spaces, that's when it looks the most dramatic, because I fully inked that in. So it is worth taking the time to do that. You might be someone who inks kind of staying in lines. Or if you remember, I had told you once that Rick likes to outline and then he does circles. And it actually does fill in rather nicely when you do the circles. And of course, the easier way to ink, if it's a larger space, is to use a larger tipped pen. So if you have an 08, this would be possibly an appropriate time. You'd have to play with it and see, because you might decide that the spaces aren't large enough for an 8. So that kind of depends on you. Okay, and there we go. Now in the corners, we're gonna do a Printemps in the middle, and then a smaller one on either side of it. There's our big one and our smaller ones. Big one, making sure that I touch the sides and the top of the circle-ish part that I created. And then, just like I did here with the flux, I'm going to go back and I'm going to lovingly ink in the parts that the Printemps did not reach. I actually feel like my pen might be running out, so I'm going to change. That was an 01. Now I'm going to use a PN, which is going to be quite similar in the width of the point. I'm sorry that I've got this shadow cast here. It's actually creating a challenge for myself. But we're almost done. Okay, and I've got one more. Okay, now before I get to shading, the last thing that I want to do, and I'm going to zoom in for you, the last thing I want to do is I want to add some texture in these rice pods. So you might think of them like eyelashes. We've used the term flick, which means I'm going to push in the beginning, and then as I move, I'm going to lift up. So I'm flicking towards the center of the rice pod or the half rice pod, but I'm leaving the middle. We have to leave the middle. Otherwise, all that we've done is put lines, much thinner, lighter weighted lines, all the way through everything. I'm leaving those flecks alone. Now, I could be turning my tile more and always flick from the bottom up, right? So instead of now flicking down, I could just rotate my tile. It's really whatever's comfortable for you. And you really do want to focus and pay attention, or you could wind up putting eyelashes someplace that you hadn't intended. But of course, if that happens, what do we say? It's okay. Our piece will just take us in a little bit of a different direction. No mistakes, just opportunities to try something else. Okay, so look at how that just added some texture to what we're doing. Okay, so now when we go to shade, we're going to take our pencil, being sure to hold it so that we get the benefit of as much lead as possible. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to put some lead all the way around that, on the outside of that inner square that I just embellished. And then I'm going to put lead along the outer edge of the entire tile. Okay, then I'm going to take my tortillon and I'm going to gently glide it, push it into the paper, going from the area of lead that I drew towards the middle. But just like we did with the eyelashes, I don't want to let them touch in the middle, because it's by leaving that middle, the color of the tile, that becomes the highlight. And this magical part of shading really never ceases to stop amazing me. Wow, just like that, I just created a rounded effect on that frame. So how are we gonna shade some other things in here? So the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put a tiny bit, not nearly as much as I did on the outer frame. I'm gonna put a tiny bit of lead in the corners of where I put my eyelashes, because I would like to soften up that area as well. So I'm not putting nearly as much. As you can see, I'm really only touching those corners just a little bit, because I'm not going to need a whole lot of lead, because based on the spaces that I have and the fact that I need to leave the middle untouched of each rice pod, I don't need a lot. I don't know if I got it there or not, so I'll start somewhere else. And then we're just going to ease our lead, just touching it a little bit, pushing it or pulling it towards the middle of each rice pod. So I am covering over those eyelashes, but when I look closely, obviously the eyelashes are still there. They're just now a little softened. And in the same way that our frame rolled and became three-dimensional, our rice pods are as well. Wow, look at that. It's like it now glows. To me, it's shining. It's really rather cool. Now, I can also take and put some lead in these corners where the flux kind of come behind those circles, because the circles would be casting a little bit of a shadow in those tight corners. So that's kind of a nice place for me to put it. I can leave the flux. I could ink them in entirely. I could embellish them further. There's just any number of things that I can do with it. And if I want, I could also add just a little bit of shading. Now watch how I'm going to do this. I'm going to borrow some shading. I'm going to run over that lead again that I already blended. And then I'm going to touch the Printemps. And look at that. There's still so much lead on my tortillon that if I'm going for something super light, I can just go over. I can just go over something that I already have lead on. So there you go. That is our first tile. It is quite quilt-like. It is our first tile on video. So hopefully I am going to be able to send this to you. Don't forget, you always want to put your chop. It can be within the tangle itself, your piece, or I could have tucked it on the corner. I could have put it on a side. I can put it so many places, but we put our chop, and on the back, we want to put the date. Today is March 2nd, and we might want to put the tangles that we used. So we did use Printemps in those corners, and we did use a form of bales with our rice pods, and we did use a form of flux plus flux, and we used stripes. Stripes, in case you're questioning what was stripes, stripes is what we did in these triangles. So I hope you had fun, and certainly stop and pause the video to help you if I went too fast. Happy tangling!